6:30 p.m. Proceedings of the briefing session are electronically recorded in accordance with the Council's recording and live streaming of Council meetings policy, except for matters of a confidential nature. The guide in determining a confidential nature is in accordance with the Local Government Act 1995. Please note that briefing sessions are audio recorded and also audio live streamed only in accordance with the Council's policy. First item of business is declarations of interest. I have a number here which I'll commence with. First of all, from Councillor Joondalup for item 13.1.9, venue hire fees and charges policy review. It's an interest that may affect impartiality, as Councillor Joondalup is the president of the Joondalup Symphony Orchestra, which performs or which utilises the Whitford's Senior Citizens venue. Further one from the Deputy Mayor for item 13.1.9, venue hire fees and charges policy, also an interest that may affect impartiality, as Deputy Mayor has a routine engagement with the Joondalup Brothers as members of the Arena Community Sports and Recreation Association and based in the North Ward. Declaration from myself. Both of those were interests that may affect impartiality. Declaration from myself, which is a financial interest for item 12.4, status of legal action reports. That is a financial interest as I work for Thompson Gear, but I do not work on City of Joondalup matters. And a further one from myself for item 12.9, list of payments. That's an interest that may affect impartiality as I do work for Thompson Gear, but not on City of Joondalup matters. Are there other declarations, councillors? Councillor Pizzi.
Just for 13.1.9, venue hire fees charges policy review, I have family members who play for Kingsley Junior Football Club and Whitford's Hockey Club. Thank you.
Councillor, please fill out the form and governance will follow up. Great. Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. I have two for item 12.8. They're both interests that may affect impartiality. The first is for AGM motion 1, 5 and 8, where I'm the Secretary of the Friends of Yellowgonga Regional Park, which has an interest in managing the regional park, and also for AGM motions 2 and 13, which is an interest that may affect impartiality, as a number of the members of the Lakeview Contemplation Garden are known to me.
Thank you. Further declarations? Councillor Hutton.
For 13.1.9 venues hire and charges policy, just making a declaration that me and family members are part of associations which use the facilities.
Thank you. If anyone becomes aware of any conflicts throughout the meeting, you'll have an opportunity. Please pipe up. There isn't a separate opportunity, but you're still able to make a declaration if something occurs. Next item of business is deputations. Deputation requests are to be made in writing to the Mayor. A period of up to 10 minutes is set aside for each deputation this evening, and deputations are not to exceed 5 persons in number, with only 3 of those persons being at liberty to address elected members and to respond to any questions that elected members may have at the end of the deputation. I'll call forward for our first deputation, Beth Hewitt, and she's giving a deputation on item 12.8. Ms Hewitt, thank you.
Beth Hewitt, Secretary of Edgewater Residents Association. Slide 1, our motion is about the City working with the DCBA and Wanneroo Council to deal with the growing problem of foxes. Next slide, please. They are an introduced species and simply don't belong here. Next slide, please. Foxes are sexually mature at 1 year of age and have an average of 4 cubs per season. With no predators, their numbers grow quickly. Do the math. 2 can become 6, become 18, become 54, and that's only in 3 years of breeding. Next slide, please. Around the lakes of Perth, they are killing the turtles. This is a photo that was taken in Bibra Lake this year, but the same thing is happening in Yellowgonga. Next slide, please. The federal government has created the Threat Abatement Plan for Predation by the European red fox. It calls for the eradication of foxes from high conservation value areas such as Yellowgonga. Next slide, please. As a land manager, the City has responsibility to work with the DCBA and the City of Wanneroo to eradicate foxes from Yellowgonga. To ensure they stay out of Yellowgonga, the suburbs also need to be cleared. Next slide, please. Edgewater is adjacent to Yellowgonga and the foxes are moving through our suburb nightly. In the past month, social media reports have been frequent. One lady has had 9 bowls of cat food taken from her yard by a large fox. Another saw 2 crossing from Edgewater into the park together. Next slide, please. This little puppy was taken from its locked yard by a big fox and required veterinary treatment. It was lucky to have been saved by a midnight runner. Next slide, please. Foxes are everywhere in the city. These scats were recently seen just north of Mullaloo Surf Club. Next slide, please. Yellowgonga is also adjacent to Woodvale, which has seen some terrible attacks on kangaroos and turtles of late. The foxes are eating turtles, carnabies when they're down on the ground foraging, frogs and just about anything. They aren't fussy. Woodvale residents have reported chickens being killed and only their heads eaten. Next slide, please. Wildlife carers have been documenting the carnage. Turtles killed, kangaroos killed. Next slide, please. The turtle on the left was female. She didn't even have a chance to lay her eggs. Next slide, please. Volunteer groups like the Friends of Yellowgonga go into the park and observe the turtles laying their eggs and then try to ensure they will survive by protecting the nesting sites. They can't, however, protect the turtles 24/7. Eradication of foxes is the only protection for our native birds, amphibians and mammals. Next slide, please. These 2 foxes killed 68 turtles over 2 days before being tracked and euthanized by volunteers. The volunteers do a wonderful job without any support from the city. With changes to gun laws coming in from 1st of April, it will be made more difficult for them to react to these situations. New requirements for notice, permissions and the type of guns used, all making it harder for them to eradicate the problem. Next slide, please. Without any support from the city, the volunteers do this work, often funding it out of their own pocket or even through donations from concerned residents. Next slide, please. These are dens that are throughout the city of Joondalup. They're easy to spot. As you can see, the scat, the diggings, and then the den. Next slide, please. The administration's report, though welcome, shows that the city spends very little on fox eradication. If you look at the credit card transactions list in your monthly report, you'll see the administration spends approximately the same every 2 months on Facebook posts as it does in a year on fox eradication. I think it's time our priorities changed before we do not have any turtles left. Next slide, please. It's time to take action. The animals the foxes predate on have no chance without us doing something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hewitt. Any questions, councillors? Thank you. Thank you for your deputation. For our next deputation, also on item 12.8, I call forward Suzanne Apps and Lynn Manuel.
Suzanne Apps of Woodvale. Unfortunately, Lynn can't be here tonight. She's attending to her husband in hospital. Good evening, councillors. Slide 2. The motion I presented on behalf of the community asks that Ranger Services to assist the community with managing injured wildlife, namely kangaroos, be reinstated. As we all know, kangaroos are a protected native species and there are several laws that pertain to them. The responsibility for kangaroos is left to the landowner on which they are found on. In the City of Joondalup's case, this would apply to the road network, footpaths, public open space, and for instance, Stuffy House. Slide 3. On moving to Woodvale some years ago, I had noticed a continual stream of Facebook posts on the community page, all asking for help with the injured kangaroos on Woodvale Drive. About 4 years ago, I was one of those people asking for help. I witnessed a large injured kangaroo outside Woodvale Secondary School during the morning peak hour drop-off time. The animal's leg was broken, blood was trailing everywhere as it desperately tried to flee the area. It hobbled and jerked from one side of the road to the other, with numerous cars swerving to miss the poor creature. This all occurred in front of children heading to school. Many bypassers offered help. One bloke even went and got his baseball bat out of the car and was about to try and put the 80-kilo roo out of its distress. Thankfully, he decided against it. After multiple calls by multiple people to various agencies, a lady turned up and promptly took out her rifle and shot the animal in front of the children. I later became aware the person concerned was an unlicensed, unaffiliated volunteer. Sadly, where there is a vacuum of support, the space is filled by well-meaning people who don't necessarily have the skills, the best judgment to act appropriately within the law. Next slide. Not 4 weeks later, at the same place, same time, I was the one swerving to miss the kangaroo. This time I was making the calls, first to the ranger, no answer, then to the wildcare, no answer. Then I put up a post on the residents group. Then I called the city again, who said ring wildcare. So I ring wildcare again, no answer. By this time, the road was totally in distress, disrupting the traffic, again in full view of the kids. So I called the police. The young officer turned up and was somewhat bewildered as to what to do. They tried to shoo the roo off the road, then tried to drag it, but not successfully. They sort of managed to get it off the road, where they decided to euthanise rather than wait for the wildcare volunteer to arrive. They took out the gun and tried to shoot it. It took 3 goes to hit the target properly. Injured kangaroos panic and move around a lot, so they aren't an easy target. Sedating is always a good option. It really was an awful experience, and again, this was close to the school entry during peak hour. The volunteer did arrive. They had been on their way to work. They inspected the roo and noted the injury wasn't that bad and the kangaroo could have been saved if it had been tranquilised. Number 5. Next slide, please. These 2 incidents caused me to look further into what the hell was going on. Even a quick glance on Facebook highlighted this continual issue. What I found out is none of the agencies work together. No one collects any data as to who's called who attended to what. There was only anecdotal reports from volunteers. So last year I tried to collect as much information via the community and local volunteers as to what were the actual numbers. So between the 14th of April and the 15th of June, there were 13 animals euthanased, 3 by the police. There was 5 dead on impact from cars. 2 joes were rescued and 5 roos were transported to a rehabilitation centre. In total, 23 calls for help. Next slide, please. We can discuss at length why Woodvale Drive in particular experiences such high volumes, but I'll just give you the highlights. Someone put a road right through the centre of a major regional park with an abundance of wildlife. Roos graze dawn, dusk and evening. During late autumn and early spring, these times clash with increased traffic on the road. And as you've all heard me say many times before, multiple times in fact, there is a steady increase of through traffic on Woodvale Drive. Next slide. So what help is there? Here's a flowchart I put together for the community. And as you can see, it's not easy to get help. If the roo is alive, you are directed to call Wildcare, who will take the details and try to liaise in most cases with an unlicensed shooter. Or if you're lucky, to get one of the local volunteers to come out. There's a big problem. Slide 2. Next slide, please. Wildcare is staffed by volunteers and only operates during daylight hours, i.e. 7:30am to 7:30pm. If there are no volunteers, the phones don't get answered. The AM and PM shift are often not filled, and it's always at a reduced capacity at the weekend. Now here's the thing, as mentioned, roos come out to feed dawn, dusk and evening. Sadly, they don't have watches to see when Wildcare are open, should they unfortunately need help. So when help is needed, there's often no way to access it. In most cases, it's up to the residents on the scene to try and contact a local volunteer to come and assist, but that relies upon knowing the volunteers exist and to have their contact numbers. If there is no help, you have to contact the police, who will try to attend if the animal is causing a safety hazard. But police will always euthanise. As described, it's not ideal. Next slide. The big question is, should police be called to manage these issues when there are alternatives? Many of the long-term residents in the area, and even 1 or 2 ex-councillors, do recall a time when the City of Joondalup and the City of Joondalup provided ranger services. The ranger did have guns and so had the means to euthanase a severely injured kangaroo. As I understand it, when the gun laws were changed and tightened up, access to guns or the ability to hold licences were removed. This seized the ability of rangers to assist. In the past, rangers were in the community and would attend and would call the local volunteers directly to come out when there was an incident. But as the service offering has changed and staff have moved on, so too has the knowledge and the connection with the local volunteers. Fast forwarding to the 1st of April this year, the gun laws are changing again, which will see many of the volunteer animal control agents have to turn in their .22 guns, which is the only legal gun that can be used to euthanise a kangaroo. Many will give up their licences as there will be restrictions on being able to shoot on private land. How this will play out waits to be seen. Wildcare are expecting a reduction in available volunteer shooters by 60 to 70%. So I presume this means we'll be calling the police more often. I've not come across one person who disagrees with the statement that we should as a society manage animals in a humane way. The process currently followed certainly doesn't do this. On many occasions, the incidents play out in front of children at Woodvale Secondary College. What does it say to these children where we treat a distressed animal with such indifference to their suffering? It actually normalises it. There is a gaping hole in the process that sees residents and ratepayers often unable to access support. Often the residents on the scene are left with having to decide to put themselves in harm's way or watch on as the animal suffers. Neither an easy choice. Surely there's a better way to manage what is a known and continual growing issue. Whilst we can debate how to fix the cause of the problem, there are ways to provide a better process for residents and ratepayers to access assistance. The city could reinstate the ranger service to be a conduit to obtain support from Wildcare or the local volunteers, to make the call to the police if a shooter or a volunteer cannot be located. Going forward, a better solution needs to be considered, the use of darting to tranquilise the animals by the rangers, which then allows for a safe opportunity to euthanise humanely, preferably without bullets, by an appropriate licensed volunteer, or to transport the kangaroo to a translocation centre. But that is for the experts to explore and work out. This is not just a Woodvale Drive problem, but a wider issue across many local government areas. At this time, as far as I understand, the City of Joondalup does not provide funds to Wildcare, even though they are providing the link to the local volunteers, who are the ones that are taking on the responsibility for the City of Joondalup. With the ever-reducing pool of volunteers in our community, I sadly believe this help will dwindle too.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Thank you, Ms Apps. For our next deputation, Bettina Gould and Kim Allen, also on item 12.8.
Okay, good evening. Bettina Gould, Shoalwater Parkway, Iluka. I'm here to respond to the officer's comments and recommendations regarding our motion requesting that Council advocate to state government for mandatory public consultation on the installation of telecommunications infrastructure, including 5G towers and small cell towers. The rapid expansion of telecommunications infrastructure is reshaping our communities. While technological advancement is important, the rights of residents to be informed and consulted should not be overlooked. While the officer's report outlines existing processes, it does not fully address community concerns or the need for stronger advocacy. Next slide, please. The city's existing consultation policy is insufficient. The officer's report states that the city's planning consultation local planning policy supports community consultation where planning approval is required. However, many telecommunications installations are exempt from planning approval, meaning public input is bypassed. The mobile phone base station deployment industry code is cited as providing notification and consultation requirements, but in practice this often amounts to little more than informing the community of a decision that's already been made, rather than engaging them in a meaningful way. The city's recent correspondence with the WA Planning Committee is not enough. The officer's reports notes that the city has written to WAPC requesting more guidance on consultation. However, this response from the WAPC confirms that there are no plans to renew the policy, or review the policy rather, at any time soon. The recommendation that no further advocacy would be of benefit is premature. Change at a state level requires persistence, and simply accepting the WAPC's current position does not serve the best interests of the community. The report ignores public health concerns. The officer's report focuses only on consultation processes but does not acknowledge growing public concerns about EME exposure. The increasing density of 5G towers means that some homes and businesses will receive significantly higher levels of EME than others. Despite Arpanza acknowledging that homes above tower antennae may experience higher exposure, independent testing has been denied, leaving residents reliant on industry self-regulation. Next slide, please. Why further advocacy is necessary. The City must take an active role in advocating for mandatory public consultation before telecommunications infrastructure is installed. The City should not take the WAP's lack of immediate action as a reason to abandon advocacy efforts. Many policy changes require continued pressure and representation of community concerns. Relying on self-regulated industry codes and outdated consultation frameworks does not align with best practices in community engagement or precautionary public health measures. Council has a duty to ensure that residents have a real voice in infrastructure decisions that affect their homes, their health, and their local environment. Next slide, please. And I'd like to introduce Kim Allen, a local advocate for our community and very well respected.
Thank you, Bettina. Good evening, presiding member, councillors, staff, members of the public. My name is Kim Allen and I live in Reacher Place, Ocean Reef. I'd like to follow on from Bettina to provide further context to the situation regarding the mobile tower constructed at Ocean Reef Marina, in the hope that Council will consider this important issue regarding the exponential growth of telecommunications infrastructure and future impacts. Local Ocean Reef residents have been engaging with the City since last year, when the tower was constructed without any standard community consultation occurring. Although the City has assisted us through our endeavours, we've now reached a point where everything that was requested has been declined, and it's clear there is no right of appeal. Next slide, please. What we're talking about is a 35-metre concrete monopole constructed within one day with absolutely no engagement or community consultation with the local community. Having worked in this area for many years, it was hard to comprehend that this could have even happened, given the industry code of conduct and telecommunication planning policies. Next slide, please. So what's on the tower? 144 mobile and fixed internet services that I'm sure will grow over time. Had this gone to community consultation, there are many viable options and locations that could have been considered. Next slide, please. Over the years, although the Telecommunications Act is robust and provides significant latitude to carriers, there is a comprehensive mobile industry code of conduct that considers the precautionary principle. And first and foremost, and both state and local government policy also address this. In this case, all of these were ignored by an apparent circumvention and actions that cannot be appealed. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly touch on two extremely important issues that present a high level of concern to the community when best practice and contemporary scientific findings are not considered as mobile infrastructure densities increase. Next slide, please. The advisory body that informs public safety, Arpanza, continues to publicise information informed by the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, the ICNRP. As you can see from this slide, recent releases have advised there are a number of health impacts that are of concern. Next slide, please. So the International Advisory Board contact the ICNRP, contact Arpanza to provide information and inform on health impacts. This particular statement of radio frequency knowledge gaps advises on several concerning issues. Next slide, please. The Arpanza website provides information also. Unfortunately, it's not updated to include this latest information from the international body. Next slide, please. So EME, electromagnetic energy, that is in the air from radio frequencies. The EMA checker is operated by the ACMA, the Australian Communication Management Authority. There is only one site in Joondalup, illustrated on the map. Tests are taken from this site occasionally. Next slide, please. These are mobile towers situated across the Joondalup city. So therefore, one EME checker is somewhat inadequate, I believe. Next slide, please. So, Spectrum Analyzer is a tool that is used to measure EME in the air. This particular analyzer has been operated at Ocean Reef and is showing high levels of EME. Next slide, please. To illustrate one particular carrier here, the red line shows through an open window with no screening a very high level of EME. Next slide, please. An aluminium lined screened blind shows quite clearly 300 metres from the tower that EME level is reduced to almost 20%. So from this, it's quite clear that window treatments and blind infrastructure can assist local residents and people in other areas where the EME can be affecting. Next slide, please. So what we're looking for is collaboration with the City of Joondalup, recognising that the increased growth of 5G, 6G and other densification of mobile networks will be a problem, to acknowledge that other health information is becoming available from other areas, and to work with us to seek information on public health measurements of EME in the environment to ensure that people are not exposed to excess levels of radiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, questions? Councillor O'Neill.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just have a question of the city, if I could, just in relation to the radio frequency testing, if there's anything that the city does in terms of if the residents request that.
Not the point in time to question
Okay.
officers. Thanks, Councillor O'Neill. Questions of deputation? Thank you, councillors. For our next deputation, also on item 12.8, Linda Crawford.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors. Linda Crawford, Gurron Road, Duncraig. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to motion 15. I am concerned with the officer's comments wishing to rely on the TGA. The issue is that we have lost our faith in the TGA's assessment of the data and we have exhausted all other avenues open to us. Slide 1. Oh, that's it. Thank you. I highlight investigative journalist Marianne Damassi's 2022 research, which was published in the BMJ, titled From FDA to MHRA, Are Drug Regulators for Hire? From a recent article, I quote, compared to other drug regulators, the TGA has the highest percentage, 96%, of its operating budget that comes from the drug industry, the very industry it's meant to regulate. 94% of drug applications submitted to the TGA are approved and 20% of drugs are approved via expedited pathways. These expedited pathways have a lower burden of proof for safety, and this is the pathway used to grant provisional approval of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines in 2021, end quote. As you've been made aware, several independent studies found excessive levels of DNA contamination in the vials. Virologist David Speaker reported levels in Australian vials exceeding the limit by 7 to 145-fold. But according to the TGA, these studies were misinformation, not robust or reliable. Marianne Damassi argues the TGA made several patently false and misleading claims. In a presentation at the Great Debate, she clearly and systematically debunked all 6 claims made by the TGA. I will cover only the first in her own words. I quote, the TGA said that all COVID vaccines were rigorously assessed. However, as I mentioned, the vaccines were rushed through an expedited approval process with no data on medium or long-term safety, meaning the drug sponsor and the regulator were supposed to closely monitor the pharmacovigilance data for harms. The TGA also did not demand any carcinogenicity or genotoxicity studies from the vaccine manufacturers prior to rolling out these vaccines to the public. And finally, Pfizer's product used in the clinical trials was not the same product that was injected into people. Process 1, a stringent method, was used to make the product tested in the pivotal clinical trials. But when it came to upscaling the production of the vaccine to make billions of doses, Pfizer switched to Process 2, which is how the problem with excessive residual DNA arose. So the TGA did not rigorously assess the products for safety. End quote. Slide 2, please. Since December, there has been several notable updates. On December 16th, Port Hedland councillor Camillo Blanco sent a letter that all councillors should have received. He reiterates, quote, "These findings have since been corroborated internationally by leading scientists such as Dr. Didier Raoult in France and Professors Kamera, Scholz and Steger in Germany. These contamination findings have also been replicated by other labs in Germany, Canada and the United States." He then goes on to state emerging new studies, quote, "Recent findings have now confirmed the presence of this synthetic DNA in the bloodstreams of Australians vaccinated with the Pfizer and Moderna products. A study involving 102 South Australian participants revealed synthetic DNA contamination in blood samples from 75 individuals who exclusively received the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines," end quote. On 23rd of December, lawyer Katie Ashby-Coppins of PJ O'Brien and Associates sent a letter to Russell Broadbent MP detailing an urgent request to present evidence of synthetic DNA contamination in the blood to the Prime Minister. In this letter, she highlights several concerns over the TGA's response. Quote, "Despite mounting evidence, the TGA has consistently sought to dismiss concerns about this DNA contamination as misinformation." The article, co-authored by Rebecca Barnett and several eminent scientists, doctors of medicine and a former barrister, titled "Addressing Allegations that DNA Contamination Concerns are Misinformation," details how the TGA has characterised legitimate scientific findings as baseless or false without conducting independent validation of the data presented, end quote. On February 3rd, 2025, Russell Broadbent MP further wrote the Prime Minister, Minister Butler and Professor Lawler of his concerns re persistent failures to address synthetic DNA contamination evidence. Marianne de Massey states, quote, "In a blistering letter to senior health leaders, Federal MP Russell Broadbent has accused the Australian Government of willful blindness over mounting evidence of DNA contamination in Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines," end quote. Russell Broadbent expresses his disappointment with the response given him in January 25 from Dr. Kerr. Quote, "Her reply fails to engage with the substantive evidence presented in my 6 of December 2024 correspondence, which included findings from internationally renowned scientists." He then goes on to say, quote, "Drawing on this unparalleled expertise, Mr McKernan, in a recent article, Open Letter to Dr Lisa Kerr, systematically dismantled Dr Kerr's response, exposing its fundamental misunderstandings, inaccuracies and outright falsehoods," end quote. Professor Ian Brighthope has also written to the Prime Minister, stating concerns, quote, "I write to you with grave concern regarding the failures of this government in addressing the catastrophic consequences of COVID-19 vaccine injuries, the blatant disregard for the affected individuals and the broken promise of a full and independent Royal Commission into the management of the pandemic. Despite mounting international evidence linking mRNA LNP vaccines to serious conditions such as myocarditis, pericarditis, strokes, neurological disorders, immune dysfunction, rapid onset terminal cancer and even sudden deaths, the Australian Government, the ABC and the mainstream media have failed to investigate or report on these devastating consequences. Instead, they have continued to push a one-sided narrative dismissing the concerns of reputable medical professionals and affected individuals as misinformation," end quote. Slide 3, please. A new declaration is fast gathering signatures from qualified and respected professionals. Rebecca Barnett states the David Declaration makes 10 demands of the Australian Government, including immediate suspension of the mRNA COVID vaccination program and a moratorium of the mRNA technology pending rigorous investigation into evidenced safety concerns, including reported excessive levels of synthetic DNA contamination in the mRNA COVID vaccines. Slide 4, please. Internationally, over 67,608 people have also signed the HOPE Accord. This includes scientists, medical doctors and other healthcare professionals. It is calling for the immediate suspension of COVID-19 vaccine products and a comprehensive review of the safety and efficacy of these products. It has been signed by notable doctors such as cardiologist Aseem Malhotra and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. According to the Daily Mail, quote, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who has been nominated to lead the NIH, has backed a petition calling for the mRNA vaccines to be paused and retested. He is one of the signatories of the HOPE Accord, which claims there is a causal link between the mRNA shots and an alarming rise in excess deaths worldwide. They go on to add, quote, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, a British cardiologist, is being considered for a health advisory role in Kennedy's new health departments, has called for the jabs to be suspended and reassessed, end quote. Slide 5, please. People from all over the world are speaking to their representatives. The North Group is made up of people from multiple countries, all calling for their elected members to listen to their concerns. France and Greece are the latest to join the North Group initiative, having sent a letter and calling for an immediate suspension of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. Slide 6, please. This screenshot of the UK letter from the North Group illustrates that the Port Hedland motion was the major driving force behind this initiative. So, as you can see, we're certainly not alone in our concerns. Though many would like to think the COVID era is over, I beg to differ. The new mRNA technology is now expanding rapidly and being incorporated into further vaccines, technologies and even our food chain. If we do not pause, apply caution and ensure rigorous safety and transparency, the results could be catastrophic for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Crawford. We probably don't have time for questions on this one. Next deputation, item 12.8 again, Ms Lorraine Schroeder.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Lorraine Schroeder, Ocean Reef. Slide 2, please. This is motion 15 and the deputation is aimed to address the officer's comments. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Officer's comment. The development and approval of vaccines is managed by federal government legislation and follows a strict and scientific process. Response. The TGA website states that COVID-19 vaccines were provisionally registered through the provisional pathway. It does not state that they have been fully approved in the traditional sense. Furthermore, the website acknowledges that these vaccines continue to be monitored. There is no mention of long-term safety data, such as genotoxicity or carcinogenicity studies. Next slide, please. Officer's comment. It was approved under the Emergency Management Act, therefore, the TGA is the responsible authority in Australia for assessing the safe use of vaccines. The TGA has indicated that all COVID-19 vaccines approved in Australia have been rigorously assessed and meet the TGA's high standards for safety, quality and efficacy. We do, however, have a number of concerns with our responsible authority, the TGA. Next slide, please. 1, conflict of interest. The TGA is primarily funded by the pharmaceutical industry it regulates, with industry fees comprising 96% of its budget, according to the British Medical Journal article. Next slide, please. This model raises concerns about the agency's ability to act as an impartial watchdog. Regularity failures of the past, such as the thalidomide disaster, underscore the absolute imperativeness of independent oversight. Next slide, please. Revolving door between regulators and industry. Next slide, please. The former TGA head, Professor John Skerritt, who oversaw COVID-19 vaccine approvals, resigned from that position and soon after accepted a position on the board of Medicines Australia, the peak lobbying body for pharmaceutical companies. This was brought to light during Senator Malcolm Roberts' inquiry. The Deputy Chair of Medicines Australia is the head of Pfizer Australia. This raises concerns about regulatory capture and whether approvals prioritised industry interests over rigorous, independent safety assessment. Next slide, please. Concerns about TGA's dismissal of emerging evidence. The TGA has been accused of downplaying risks associated with synthetic DNA contamination, claiming it would degrade rapidly despite peer-reviewed studies suggesting otherwise. Dr. Lisa Kerr, a key TGA official, has consistently misrepresented safety thresholds and demonstrated a lack of technical expertise and mRNA technology. The Freedom of Information request by investigative journalist Marianne Damasi uncovered emails within the TGA discussing the risks of DNA contamination in vaccines. These internal discussions reveal that the agency was unprepared to handle the complexities of the science despite publicly downplaying the dangers. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Thank you. The Federal Government Department of Health and Aged Care states regular COVID-19 vaccinations are the best way to maintain protection against severe illness, hospitalisation and death from COVID-19. Next slide, please. On what basis? Recent discoveries of synthetic DNA contamination and studies of excess deaths suggest otherwise. Independent studies indicate that these concerns warrant further investigation. Next slide, please. Officers' comment. At its meeting held 10 December 2024, Council considered a similar request via a notice of motion seeking the City to advocate for a Royal Commission into Australia's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including writing to the Governor-General and federal members of Parliament. The notice of motion was not carried. Response. This motion is different. It does not call for a Royal Commission, but simply asks for advocacy regarding specific emerging concerns about vaccine safety. Next slide, please. Officers' recommendation that Council in relation to motion 15 carried at the annual general meeting of electors, 1, notes that the development and approval of vaccines is managed by federal government legislation. Response. This motion does not ask the Council to change legislation. It simply requests that the Council write a letter expressing grave concerns about the continued rollout of these experimental injections and urging relevant authorities to act. Next slide, please. 2, notes that the TGA is a responsible authority in Australia for assessing the safe use of vaccines and has indicated that all COVID-19 vaccines approved in Australia have been rigorously assessed and meet its high standards for safety, quality and efficacy. Response. Given significant concerns regarding the TGA's ability to meet its own standards, this motion asks the Government to engage an independent body of qualified experts, including the Chief Health Officer and the Gene Technology Technical Advisory Committee, to conduct a comprehensive, science-based evaluation of emerging evidence regarding synthetic DNA contamination in the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines. Next slide, please. 3, notes that the TGA, as the agent responsible for the assessment and approval of COVID-19 vaccinations, has previously released a statement in response to concerns in relation to the safety of some COVID-19 vaccinations. Response. A response has been provided earlier on about TGA's inability to address the complexities of the new technology. So in conclusion, this motion does not ask the Council to make any determinations about vaccine safety or public health policy. Instead, it simply requests that the relevant authorities with the expertise and jurisdiction investigate these concerns thoroughly. By doing so, we ensure that our community's questions and concerns are taken seriously. urging the suspension of these vaccines and requesting a thorough scientific evaluation of emerging evidence about potential synthetic DNA contamination reflects a precautionary approach and emphasises the absolute imperativeness of independent, science-based investigations to maintain the highest standards of public health and safety. Investigating excess deaths and hospitalisations following vaccine rollouts is equally essential. Such inquiries are certainly a matter of public interest to provide clarity on any potential links and to ensure future health policies are informed by robust, transparent data. This motion is not intended to alarm, but rather to act responsibly on behalf of our community. By supporting this motion, the Council demonstrates its commitment to advocating for transparency, accountability, and the well-being of its residents. I urge you to support this motion so that these pressing concerns can be addressed at the highest levels of government and health administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Time for any questions? Thank you. Next item of business is public question time. There's a set of procedures which relates to public question time, and I'll request that you follow my direction at all times. You'll have an opportunity to ask 2 questions. Your questions should be directed to the chair and asked in a polite and respectful manner. And questions at a briefing session must relate to an item listed on the briefing session agenda. Also, as per our meeting procedures local law, please state your name and address on the public record before asking your question. Are there any questions? If not, that concludes public question time. Next item of business is public statement time. There's a set of procedures which also relates to public statement time, and I'll request that you follow my direction at all times. You're able to make a statement for up to 2 minutes. Your statement should be directed to the chair and be polite and respectful. No question or discussion will occur at the end of your statement, and statements made at a briefing session also must relate to an item listed on the briefing session agenda. And as per question time, please state your name and address for the public record before making your statement. As I said at the start, with a set of procedures relating to public statement time, you'll also see in the agenda procedures relating to deputations. One of those is that people who have given a deputation are not permitted to make a public statement on the same item, and given all the deputations are on item 12.8, it'll apply to that. We also maintain a register for people who wish to make a statement at public statement time, so I will work through that, obviously with the exception of people who participated in deputations. I call forward for our first statement, Miss Tessie Espiron.
Good evening. My name is Tessa and I'm representing the area of Belden, and I'm discussing item 12.8. My background is as a reptile rehabilitator and kangaroo tracker for native animal rescue in the capacity of a volunteer for the last 6 years. In my time in this role, I've been called to assist injured wildlife and worked with many local management groups like Friends of Yellowgonga, WA Wildlife Carers, Friends of Woodvale Kangaroos, for our local community members in a non-paying capacity with no government support, hours of my personal time helping wildlife for all areas around Lake Yellowgonga. In that time, I have seen the detrimental effect of introduced species such as foxes and the damage they're doing in council and DBCA managed areas, plus residential properties surrounding, and it has been very frustrating as I've realised over the years that the DBCA and council subsidised fox contractor is limited to working only 6 weeks trapping for all our Yellowgonga nature reserves per year. Foxes are eating turtles, quenders, birds, snakes and all reptiles in great numbers, and now they're pack hunting kangaroos. We are currently losing 20 to 30 kangaroos per month just around Woodvale alone. You just have to walk around the reserve and you see the evidence of their predation, carcasses everywhere. Research by our hardworking Friends of Yellowgonga group have shown that our long-necked turtle population numbers for our hatchling and juvenile turtle population numbers are at critical levels, and unfortunately with current rates of predation, we are seeing a devastating decline in breeding adults available into the future, Our snake-necked population is severely under pressure, especially as current adults are predated every year during breeding season and nests are dug up every day. Estimates are that they will be non-existent in the next 5 years around Yellowgonga, let alone other wildlife species that are being targeted daily too. Foxes have dens every 500 metres around the lake and move over three den sites.
Thank you for your statement. Sorry, I'm aware you haven't made statements here before. I enforce the 2 minutes quite strictly. Mrs. Teresa Fairley.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Teresa Fairley and I live on 12 Deverell Square in Hillary's. In addition to what Linda Crawford and Lorraine Schroeder said, I'm just going to talk about the excess deaths. On March the 31st, 2023, the Australian Bureau of Statistics reported that there were 15.3% more deaths than normal in 2022. This is what the March release said, quote, "In 2022, there were 190,394 deaths that occurred by 31st of December and were registered by 28th of February 2023, which is 25,235 more, or i.e. 15.3% more than the historical average." Lorraine had the graph up, which showed the huge rise of the 15% and what was in prior years. Before the highly anomalous year of 2022, the highest annual increase in deaths per population was 4.3%, which occurred in 1964. On average, over the 67-year period, there was an annual of 1.6% decrease in the death rate. In 2020, any death from COVID was headline news. This was the year COVID started, and the graph clearly shows the excess death rate was actually minus 5.0%. Then the jabs were introduced in 2021 and 2022, and the death rate soared. In the entire year of 2020, 906 people were reported by the ABS as dying of the disease. As now, our latest statistical information suggests that more than the number of Australians may be dying every 3 weeks without proper explanation. Were the extra deaths due to COVID is the main question. Australians deserve answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Michelle Kwok.
Michelle Kwok, 15 Proverbial Ocean Reef. Mayor, Councillors, Kaya. I speak tonight in support of motion 3, calling for greater transparency and efficiency in the EBA negotiations. The process has dragged on for years. This is highly unacceptable. Even now, no date has been set for the Industrial Commission hearing, which could push back the resolution even further. This means the next EBA, due to start on 1st of July 2025, will likely face similar delays, leading to another round of back pay issues. Currently, the city owes around $5 million in back pay to employees, yet there's no clear financial strategy to manage this. Many staff who have left since mid-2022 will miss out entirely. This could be viewed as wage theft. Low morale and high turnover are clear consequences of this situation, and further delays will only deepen these impacts. Whilst Council is not directly responsible for EBA negotiations, it has a duty to ensure financial accountability. Ratepayers and employees deserve transparency on how this process is managed, including clear reporting on financial impacts before agreements are finalized. We urge Council to commit to expediting this process, ensure proper financial planning for back pay, and require clear reporting on EBA progress to provide certainty to employees and the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kwok. Ms. Jacqueline Hope.
Good evening, everyone. Jacqueline Hope, 136 Gradient Way, Belden. as a response to the officer's comment and recommendation for motion 4. While the city's existing process allows members of the public to submit booking requests for open spaces and community facilities, the purpose of this motion is to request a special permit that ensures the Forest of the Fallen display is given clear and consistent approval to be held monthly without uncertainty or administrative hurdles. This display is an important public awareness initiative, and unlike general park bookings for private events, it serves a broader community interest. Granting a special permit would provide clarity and certainty for organisers and the community. It would ensure there is no unnecessary administrative burden or delays each month, align with the city's commitment to supporting public awareness and advocacy initiatives in community spaces. The officer's recommendation merely notes that a booking request can be made, which does not address the intent of the motion, to secure a formal, ongoing arrangement for this display. A special permit would acknowledge the significance of this display and allow it to proceed smoothly without unnecessary burdens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hope. Mr Pedro Perez.
Good evening, Councillor and Mayor and staff and all members of the public. My name is Pedro Perez from Dracena Street in Greenwood. I'm here to speak in support of Motion 21, requesting greater transparency regarding elected members' dinners and formal city dinners, as well as the proposed reduction in the number of these dinners. The officer has recommended against publishing guest lists, citing privacy concerns. However, it is a standard practice in many government bodies to publish guest lists for public events with the consent of attendees. This is easily achieved through a simple opt-in system at the time of invitation. If a guest chooses not to have their name published, their details can be omitted, but this should not justify withholding all the guest information. Guest details are already being reported quarterly to the Audit and Risk Committee, meaning the information is already collected. The argument that obtaining consent is operationally impractical does not hold when a simple process can be implemented. The motion calls for a 50% reduction in elected members' dinners. The officer's response does not oppose this in principle, but instead suggests deferring the discussion to the 2025-2026 policy review. This delay is unnecessary as the dinners are not being used to their full extent, and a reduction would have minimal operations impact. Reducing the number of dinners now, rather than delaying the decision, demonstrates proactive governance. The officer's response acknowledges that Council has the discretion to amend the policy at any time. In conclusion, I urge the Council to support this motion in full. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Pedro Perez. Mr Ian Hurst.
Good evening. Ian Hurst, 23 Mainsail Drive, Ocean Reef. I've been a resident of Ocean Reef for 38 years, 29 years in our current address, which is right directly in front of this 5G Telstra money pole. It's quite concerning. Our neighbours, young children, they're selling up now because of the health hazard, the risks that are there. The emissions we've had independently testing, and they're going up and up each week. So the more that's put on this money pole, the more that we're being affected. So I don't agree with having window coverings. It's not the answer for me. I want the sea breezes at night coming through. We want the windows open. The City of Joondalup ultimately approved this tower. So they're responsible. So we want the thing fixed. It was put there for. It was put there without any knowledge from the public, no consultation whatsoever. It's moved the problem away from where the Sea Sports Club is, So all the new development, that's fine. The developers have got their way. There's no 5G tower near there, but you've put the problem right in front, right across the road from us. So the City of Joondalup have approved a hazard across the road from us. We would like that hazard removed. There's been no monitoring by the City of Joondalup. No concerns whatsoever, and that is really disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hurst. Ms Joanne Giroux.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and public attending. My name is Joanne Groward, 27 Wakatipu Way, Joondalup. I'm in response to the officer's comments on motion 6, publishing verbatim submissions. I speak tonight in support of the motion requesting that submissions received during community consultations be published verbatim in clear, accessible and unaltered format, including all references and hyperlinks in plain text. This motion seeks to ensure that submissions are accurately presented without unnecessary reductions or alterations. Transparency in community engagement is fundamental to public trust. Our main concern is the removal of hyperlinks. The officer's comments state that hyperlinks are removed for cyber security reasons and that submitters will be asked not to include them in the future. This concern is misplaced as hyperlinks can simply be displayed as plain text without being active links. This removes any security risks while preserving the integrity of the original submission. Hyperlinks often provide important references, evidence or supporting documents. Removing them entirely reduces the ability of decision makers and the public to fully understand the context and validity of submissions. The officer's response emphasises that the city is a publisher and can be held liable for defamation. However, many other councils publish community submissions in full, demonstrating that there are ways to manage this risk without excessive redaction. If the city is concerned about liability, a clear disclaimer would be included stating that submissions reflect individual views and not those of the city. By adopting these measures, the city can uphold the principles of transparency and community trust while ensuring public consultation remains meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes public statement time. Next item of business is apologies and leaves of absence. I've received an apology from Councillor Jones, Councillor May and Councillor Hamilton Prime, and otherwise I think we have a full house. Are there any elected members requesting leaves of absence to be decided at the ordinary council meeting? If not, next item you'll see is confirmation of minutes, which will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting, as will item 9, being announcements by the presiding member without discussion. Identification of matters for which the meeting may be closed to the public, that is item 12.4, the status of legal actions reports, and item 13.1.9, venue hire fees and charges policy review. So I'll move those to the very back of the agenda, as is standard practice for briefing sessions. Next item is petitions. We do have a petition in relation to the removal of the verge tree at the intersection of Taft Street and Hillwood Avenue in Warwick, next to Hillwood Park, and that's a 77 signature petition which will be considered at the ordinary council meeting. Are there any other petitions received by elected members? If not, proceed to the reports section of the agenda and commence at the beginning, work my way through, obviously, as I said, moving item 12.4 to the very end. So item 12.1, development and subdivision applications. Any questions on this item? Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. My question goes to the Woodvale Drive site, which we've previously had a scheme amendment for. When do we envisage the subdivision application to be put forward, and what comments would the city intend to put against that application?
Bit limited, because I don't think that's actually in the briefing session agenda. I think you were advised that something is coming, but I'm struggling to allow that question, Councillor Kingston, unless you can point to it in the agenda.
It's that the The item deals with the submissions which the city makes under delegated authority. So this goes to the delegated authority that's exercised under Report 12.1.
But no delegated authority has been exercised as yet for that proposal.
But it will be.
Yes, but I don't think I can allow that question. Do you have another question?
But that's all right. I'll follow it up at another time then.
Thank you. Further questions? Item 12.2, City Centre Parking Fees Strategy, Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the business case and recommendation for changes to parking management, particularly in relation to the fees charged in our city centre. Parking management of the city centre has been the subject of a number of investigations since it was introduced in 2008 and 2009. The key drivers behind this latest review include there being an appetite from Council to review our approach to parking in this centre, as evidenced in a number of council decisions, the recent implementation of the city's integrated parking and compliance management system project, which provides us with a new centralised system to manage all parking related activities. This new system also creates an opportunity to simplify parking management in the city centre to improve user experience and support local businesses. Another driver has been to complement other initiatives currently being delivered in the city centre to enhance its development and activation outcomes, as identified in our Expanding Horizons, our economic development strategy, as well as our Joondalup City Centre Place Activation Plan. And finally, based on our analysis, the city centre car parks are underutilised, and while they are providing a financial return, they could be considered to be underperforming in a broader sense. So the city's approach to this latest review was to prepare a business case underpinned by a multi-criteria assessment to guide our analysis and ultimately provide a recommendation for Council's consideration. A range of options were identified, 7 of which were shortlisted and then subjected to the multi-criteria assessment, along with an as-is or base case option. The options within the business case were refined further, with 3 of these options progressing and then considered against 2 further options that arose from feedback received. The outcome of the city's analysis recommends a change to parking management and fees charged for parking in the city centre, which can be summarised as an overall reduction in parking fees across the city centre, the introduction of 30-minute free parking for on-street parking in the city centre core, the standardisation of parking time limits to 2 hours maximum for on-street parking in the city centre core and allowing all-day parking permitted elsewhere, the standardisation of hours when parking management is in place, being 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, the introduction of rounded numbers for parking charges for ease of use, and the simplification of parking areas to just 3 arrangements. So we intend to have our off-street parking areas, and then we also intend to have a city centre core on-street parking area and an outer on-street parking area. And we've aligned the boundary between the core and outer areas with the boundary of our Joondalup City Centre Place Activation Plan. And finally, through the process, we've also given consideration to opening the Reed Promenade multi-storey car park at weekends, which currently isn't the case. We consider making the multi-storey car park available on the weekend will have minimal financial impact, but it will also provide an alternative parking opportunity for people visiting our city centre, and it may also help to highlight the multi-stories location and availability for those that wouldn't otherwise be aware of it. And as such, we are supportive of pursuing that initiative at the same time as revising our parking management and fee structures for the city centre. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Director Lee. Councillors, questions? Councillor Hutton.
Sorry, just before we start, I forgot to this one before. Interest that may infect impartiality. My family operates a business in Joondalup CBD. Just moving on to some questions. On page, let me just get this right, on page 28 of the report, it makes reference to the parking facility reserve. However, it doesn't specify exactly where the reserve is actually used. Would I just be able to seek some clarity? Is the parking facility reserve only used in Joondalup CBD?
Director Lee.
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I may ask Alan Ellingham, our Senior Financial Analyst, to respond to that question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, the reserve is specifically set out just for Joondalup City Centre. The definition is set as part of the adopted budget each year.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from that, how is parking funded in other areas of the city that aren't the CBD?
Director Lee or Director Glasson? Director Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I will begin, and if the Director of Infrastructure Services has anything further to add, he may. Parking outside of the city centre, as I understand, is funded through our Capital Works program. There are, however, instances where development proposals may also provide some parking within the verge as well as part of their approvals.
Director Glasson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and in addition to that, in specific areas there were in the past cash and lieu provided for parking, which we then utilise specifically in alignment with the requirements of that cash and lieu provision.
Councillor Hutton.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, just following from that, just to clarify, is the CBD the only part of the city of Joondalup where the funding of parking is coming from fees as opposed to from general rate base?
Mr Ellingham.
Yes, that's correct, yep.
Thank you. Just on to page 26 of the report, there is weightings shown for the different criterias. I just wanted to seek some clarity. Firstly was around the unweighted and the weighted score. Could we just get some clarity around what is it that causes the scores to vary? I'm particularly interested to understand why 3 scores on the unweighted are all number 1, 69, which is option 2, 3, and 5. And then why for the weighted score do we see option 3 move up higher? I'm just trying to understand what the variance is that's actually causing that number to increase.
Mr Allen.
To you, Mr Mayor. So the unweighted is just a simple addition of the scores from 1 to 10. But then the weighted score is a bit more of a complicated process, so we get a difference there of weights. So what happens, we've got 10 criteria, and we've actually weighted the 10 criteria in terms of importance. So then when the scores are actually scored against the criteria, it creates a difference in terms of the weighted. I believe the report's actually got details of the weightings, etc. But if it doesn't, then we can certainly provide that. I know that the business case provided extensive details of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hutton.
Yeah, happy to take this on notice. My specific question around the weighted and unweighted is particularly, there's mention to the financial risk. Option 3, I think, has higher financial risk, but it's rated higher on the weighted score. So I suppose my question on notice is just to get an understanding of why with the higher financial risk that's rated higher, whereas option 5 is rated lower. But I'm happy for you to take that on notice. Page 27.
Councillor Hutton, just through the chair, as you ask questions.
Oh, sorry,
please.
yeah, through the chair. Page 27 of the report obviously makes reference to the core areas which no longer are going to have all-day parking available. That's the on-street core areas. I just want to get an understanding of, do we actually have any utilisation of those on-street, on-core areas where people are parking all day? Or is this effectively a redundant service that no one's using?
Mr Ellingham.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, the business case, which was attachment 1, includes extensive details of utilisation analysis against all of those areas. So it's got a lot of details. It's got the utilisation split between Monday to Friday, different periods of the day and different months.
Yep, thank you. And
Further question, Councillor Hutton?
Just my final question. In regards to the surplus, what is the total revenue received through parking income, and what is the total cost of actually running a parking service?
Mr Ellingham.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So section 4 of attachment 2's got details of that. So we see that the parking fees are listed there. We've got $3.5 million in parking fees, other income in terms of infringement, and then the operating expenses as well. So we've got operating expenses of $1 million for employment costs, 0.8 million for operating expenses, parking machines, etc. and that gives us the surplus of $2.1 million there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Further questions? Councillor Kingston?
Thank you. My first question goes to, could we get a number of businesses in the city and the types of those businesses, whether they are retail or hospitality or so on? So that's excluding Lakeside, but the other areas. Do we have those numbers?
Director Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take that question on notice and provide what information we do have in that regard for Council.
Thank you. And then my next question goes to the future aspirations to build another multi-storey car park, and this is also to assist with the Boaz Place development. It's previously been suggested that the parking reserve would be used to fund that. Could I have on notice what the value of that building, if it was to be built, and if that was to be funded with a loan, say if it was a $50 million construction and a 4% loan, that's 2%, sorry, that's $2 million a year. It appeared that we've previously built parking facilities that have been self-funding. Would that project be then self-funding given the significant decrease of the parking fees? It's a long question.
It is, and I noted that you were happy to take it on notice, I think, but I will go to Director Humphrey, who's happy to give an answer.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I will take it on notice, but I just want to seek a point of clarification. Is the councillor requesting a costing on the last concept for the multi-storey car park that we had, or just a generic 5-storey type parking facility?
On our previous concepts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you. And a further question, this is probably putting in an alternate for tab point 4, for there to be scheduling of a review at the end of before the 26-27 budget and the 27-28 budget to see if this is in fact increasing activation in the city centre. Because there seems to be in the report a 2-year time frame, so I think just let's book in a review.
Thank you. You've got that, Director Lee? Yep. Further questions? Councillor Raftis?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question regarding the impact of each of these options on the 10-year, on the long-term financial plan. Do we have those numbers with the full impacts over that full period?
Mr Allingham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we can take that notice and provide that, but yes, these proposals would reduce the surplus, so that would reduce the surpluses going into the parking facilities reserve. So yeah, we can provide an estimate of what that would look like. Notwithstanding, as Councillor Kingston has raised, the potential for a future multi-storey car park as well. But yeah, we'll provide that.
Councillor Raftis.
Thank you. Seeking clarity around one of the early questions. Does the city manage parking at Hillary's Boat Harbour? Do we get any revenue from that, or have we ceased doing that?
Director Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. We provide, on behalf and in agreement with the Department of Transport, some parking management of the boat trailer parking areas. We don't manage the parking more generally in Hillary's Boat Harbour, but happy to provide some details for the elected members in the briefing pack about what our arrangement extends to.
Councillor Raftis.
Yes, thank you. Will that information include how much revenue and profit, the cost of operating that, and whether those surplus funds go into the reserve or whether they go into general revenue?
Director.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, happy to provide those details in the briefing pack as well.
Further questions?
Mayor, if I may, I forgot to mention before, just an alternate to insert on-street and off-street for the 30 minutes free.
So just to clarify, do you mean off-street as a whole or off-street multi-storey?
No, sorry. Yes, it would be as a whole. It's as per one of the options that have already been drafted up by the administration, yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Hutt. Item 12.3, execution of documents. Any questions on this item?
Yes.
Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. My question goes to the licence agreement for Padbury Circle. Could we just have an understanding of what clauses are in place for that agreement with the developer and what protections there are for residents? And then secondly, what is the value under the agreement? So if there's a rental value or a higher value for the park?
Director Glasson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, quite a lot of information. I'll take that on notice. Councillor Kingston provided in the pack.
Further questions?
Yes, thank you. And then just if that can be added to just the question on are there any dishonour fees? So if the builder or the developer does not keep to the bounds of which they'll be using, so are there additional fees that may be imposed for the agreement?
Director.
Provide the provisions of the licence agreement, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. 12.5, status of council decisions. Questions on this item? 12.6, status of petitions. Any questions on this item? Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. Just briefly, the petition for Superior Rise in Edgewater. So this came up at the December meeting. The lead petitioner said that there was a information sheet which they circulated with the petition to the administration. Could we get a copy of that information sheet?
Director Perry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can find that copy of the information sheet, I'll put that within the briefing notes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further question?
Thank you. And a further question. This is the question on the petition from Merrifield Place. It says that the city would get in touch with the residents when there is a further concept being considered or developed. What is the status of this project? Will it be in the next capital works budget? And what is the process that will occur to discuss and consult with the residents?
Director Glasson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we currently have not commenced with an alternate design. The funding will be carried forward into the next financial year to enable that project then to progress when we have the resources to look at that.
Further question?
Thank you. And then just to the second half of my two-point question, how do we expect the consultation with the residents in the street? Will we go to them directly and have a meeting with them about the design?
Director.
From memory, through Mr. Mayor, I think there's a specific council position regarding consultation, and we'll follow that decision of council. I'm not currently can't remember the exact wording. Happy to provide that in the pack and just provide some clarity on that.
Thank you.
Further questions, Councillor Chester?
Yes, thank you. I do have a question on the state of a chua tree which was part of the development approval for the latest addition of buildings in Corinthian Court in Kingsley. The request from the residents was that it be removed and replaced with a more suitable tree. I wonder if I could ask the director what the outcome was there. I haven't heard anything.
Director Lee.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. We have a live development application at the moment that we're currently assessing. As the previous decision was a decision of council, that will be coming to council for a decision, we think at this stage, April or May.
Further questions? 12.7, local government elections, appointment of WA Electoral Commission. Any questions on this item? Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. My first question goes to the agreement that will be signed. Are there any provisions in this agreement to support prosecutions for people that commit electoral offences?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, who would support the prosecutions? Are you talking of the city or are you talking of other parties?
I'm referring to the Electoral Commission has the power to prosecute for electoral offences. Are there clauses in this agreement that there is a presumption that the WAC is to prosecute if an electoral offence occurs?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I think that would be the presumption, and that we would work with the WA Electoral Commissioner to ensure that if there were offences that were breached, that the law would be enacted the way in which it was intended to.
Thank you. Further questions?
Yes, and it goes to false statements in the bios which are circulated in local government elections. As far as those false statements, what part does the city play any part in supporting the WAC in determining whether any of those statements are false, providing supporting information to them?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the determination as to whether the information is correct is at the returning officer's discretion. I think if there was information that was deemed to be incorrect or unsubstantiated, then the city would bring that to the returning officer's attention.
Councillor.
Thank you. As far as the format of the election, recently it's always been a postal election. Is it possible for there to be an in-person provision for election day advertised? So at the moment, people can come in on election day to the place where the votes are counted and receive a ballot reissued to them. Is it possible to formalise that so people can, if they wish, come in on election day?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we will have a polling place that is, well, we will have at least 1 or 2 polling places available for members of the public to come in and to cast their votes. It would remain as a postal election though, so I don't think you can have a hybrid methodology. It would be one postal election or in person, but the polling booths would allow people to come in if they had lost, misplaced or hadn't received their postal ballot papers to come in and make an in-person election.
Further question?
Yes, thank you. There's been recent concerns about the WA Electoral Commission's performance at the state election, but also at the last local government election where in Fremantle they delivered the wrong ballots to the wrong wards. How can we ensure that there is accountability for the election being performed correctly by the Electoral Commissioner?
Do you mean accountability or do you mean that error will never occur?
Accountability for error.
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the City of Joondalup's had an exceptionally good relationship with the WAC over the years, that it's provided election services to the city and has been very accommodating in meeting all of our requirements. We do know that, and this was submitted through to the Council in October last year, was the Walga advocacy position with regard to elections and the WAC's role in relation to elections as well. So there was a number of concerns that were raised through by Walga, which was also through the City of Joondalup's representatives on the North Metropolitan Zone about ensuring a number of factors in relation to the undertaking of the elections by the WA Electoral Commission. So it is worth probably having a look at that paper in October 2024 to see what the Walga position was. A lot of it was around the costings, a lot of more engagement with local government about the elections, the roles and responsibilities of the Electoral Commission and local governments, transparency, and also looking at other legislative frameworks that would allow more than one election provider to participate. But the cost recovery principles were one of those areas that was of concern, and I think we agreed that we would like to have a service level agreement with the Electoral Commission to determine roles and responsibilities and successful outcomes.
Councillor.
Thank you. And then just lastly, could we write to the Electoral Commissioner and ask him what steps are being taken so that the errors that occurred in the last local government election are not repeated, given that those ended up going down to the Court of Disputed Returns?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we can do that. I'm sure it is the top of the list of local government's concerns that there is the eradication of all errors and that the WA Electoral Commission has in place controls and treatments to be able to manage those types of risks.
Thank you.
I think just word of caution about noting matters went to Court of Disputed Returns because I don't think they were upheld. So there's inferences when you make that statement, potentially, Councillor Kingston. So just be a bit careful on that.
I think it's probably
Thank
worth,
you.
Yeah,
Just
I'll leave it
a bit
there.
of a warning.
Thank you.
Further questions on this? Councillor Hutton.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor, just on page 46 of the report, makes reference to the cost of the election, 680,000, up from 502,000 last time. I imagine mostly because it's a mayoral election. Could we just get reference to what the cost was in 2021, which was the last mayoral election, just as a comparison?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we can provide that information in the briefing pack. I don't have that on hand.
No worries, thank you. Now, just in terms of proceeding with the WEC, are there other options that have been explored by ourselves or other councils? And if so, what are those options?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the options that are available to the council are the ones that are presented within the report. As I mentioned, Walga did put forward an advocacy position last year for a review of the legislative framework that would allow for more than one election provider to conduct local government elections. At this particular time, local government in Western Australia is not afforded that particular opportunity.
Councillor.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, just in terms of the estimates we've received, are they based on an indicative? Actually, I've just saw it. It's fine. Next question. In terms of the actual fee of the election and the estimation, last time round there was a big issue around the slow counting of ballots, which blew up the cost. Is there a way that we can actually have a fixed fee agreed with the Electoral Commission to prevent unnecessary cost escalation happening throughout the evening?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe our count was probably conducted more quickly than most other local governments. There was a requirement, though, in the process to seek, I think, the Department of Local Government's approvals prior to moving through some of the counting process. I believe in the correspondence that the Electoral Commission has provided that they have reduced some of those issues that have been presented to them at the last election, probably caused by the change in voting methodologies back to preferential. But I doubt whether the Electoral Commission would be accepting of a fixed cost.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Raftis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just a clarification on page 126. The reference in the letter to count to be conducted at your office using Count WA. Can we clarify, what is Count WA? Is it software? Is it a third-party organisation? Seeking some clarification, please.
Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's the software that's used by the WA Electoral Commission to undertake the count.
Further questions? 12.8. Minutes of Annual General Meeting of Electors. Any questions on this item? Councillor Kingston.
Do we want to go through the motions one by one so we don't go all over the place?
We're just taking questions. Councillor Kingston, questions?
All right. In that case, I will start with questions on motion 1. So my question goes to, given that there has been state government commitments for significant funding for fox control, is there any merit on updating this motion to add a point 4 about the city coordinating with the City of Wanneroo, City of Joondalup and DBCA on fox control within Yellowgonga Regional Park?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent of the officer's recommendation is to work with both of those parties to increase the amount of fox control that's conducted. Given that the level of spending has increased to 3 fox control over the year, I think there is the opportunity for all 3 parties to have that discussion about increasing their funding mutually. I'm not sure about including a 4th recommendation based on suggested funding, which I have not seen anything in writing.
Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. I will be foreshadowing a point 4 on that about us also promoting FoxScan on that, but I'll move on.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Oh, sorry.
I had trouble hearing it.
I'm sorry, asking that the CEO promote FoxScan, which is used to report fox sightings within WA, and then that's reported to the department.
Thank you.
So, may I move on? If that's okay? Yes, thank you. So on motion number 2, could I get what is the cost to currently supply the 2 1,000-litre tanks to the Lakeview Contemplation Garden, and how does that compare to the $7,000 for a water meter installed?
Director Glasson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll take that on notice and provide it back.
Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. Coming then to motion 3. As the EBA process proceeds and it goes to the WAIRC, will the council be updated of that legal matter through the status of legal actions report?
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, presiding member, we'll provide updates to council as appropriate through the appropriate mechanism.
Thank you. And then following on, could I also get, this is probably best on notice, what is the administration doing to try and find a pathway with the employees, the union and the administration to get back on track the bargaining process for the next EBA, given that the one which is being negotiated expires at June 30? Just trying to understand then what is being done to get the next one on track.
Do you wish to take that on notice, Mr. CEO? Yep. Take on notice.
Thank you. Going then on to motion 5, could I ask about, has the City of Joondalup had any discussions with the City of Wanneroo about managing wildlife wildlife within the district? So out of hours, when the rangers are not available, there isn't a service except for volunteers. Has the city had any discussions with the City of Wanneroo or anyone else about how best to manage wildlife?
Director Lee.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Not that I'm aware of specifically, but happy to take that question on notice, as there may have been other conversations between the City of Joondalup and the City of Wanneroo.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll also be contemplating a point 4 on there about a report about creating a kangaroo management plan with the City of Wanneroo and DBCA about trying to facilitate wildlife care and whether it's possible to have some service where the kangaroos can be sedated rather than shot as they currently are. But I'll move on if that's okay. Thank you. The next question I have is on motion 8, which is about the dirt bikes in the area. Currently, is there any head of power to prosecute a person who is riding a dirt bike within that location? I believe under the local law, if you have a vehicle on local government property, can they be prosecuted?
Director.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe so, but what I'd like to do is take it on notice and just provide the specific clauses under the relevant local law where that's able to be done.
Thank you.
Councillor.
My further question then goes to the gate. It says here that the gate is not locked to allow universal access to the community, and then there's being considered a provision of bollards instead of a gate. If the bollards are to prevent dirt bikes, which are the principal issue, won't that also prevent universal access to the site? That a dirt bike might be as wide as a accessibility scooter?
Director Glasson.
Mr. Mayor, the bollards is intended to prevent quad bikes. It will not prevent dirt bikes as such. We'll have to have a look at the width of that, but it's not assumed that it will prevent dirt bikes, no.
Okay.
Councillor.
Thank you. And just lastly on this motion, is there anything that can be done to fine or prosecute the people who are currently doing this? Because I think once it's deterred, that might bring it to an end.
Probably Director Lee's area.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to look at a few different options that I can present to elected members in the briefing pack. The first that comes to mind is we can have a look at the location to see if it's suitable to deploy one of our mobile CCTV cameras. We're aware that they can act as a successful deterrent to that type of behaviour, but as I said, happy to take the question on notice and see what other initiatives we can look at.
Yep.
Thank you. Do you have any questions on motion 9, Councillor Kingston?
Motion. No, I didn't.
I just have one, if you don't mind me jumping in at this point, just to keep it chronological, or I'll go back to others if they wish to. Director Lee, can I look at, because I note this comes up later as well, potential wording which gives a target date to commence review of the activity centre plan?
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, happy to consider what that date might be. It's obviously something that we flagged that we do need to do in the coming, in the near future, but happy to look at a more specific date.
Yeah, I think, its expiry is October 2028. It'll probably take us a few years, so I'm pretty keen to flag a date. And there's other matters, as you well know, that I've discussed that I think we should give a clear indication. So if you can give me some alternate wording, and I'll discuss with you offline what a clear start date is for that. Thank you. Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. I'll be jumping ahead to motion 13. And my question goes to the officer's comment on page 62. It says that this is about providing a bin, that the following year's collection fee will be approximately $680. I was comparing this to the list of fees and charges for annual collection of bins. For the annual collection of 3 bins, and the fees and charges is $375. I'm just trying to understand, why is it significantly more expensive?
Director Klassen.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the $375 for residential bins, where the residential bins is placed on the verge, very close to where it's picked up on the pickup day. The collection of other bins is specifically for similar locations. It came about when there was request for the placement of bins at Yellowgonga Regional Park, and that's the cost to provide that service is estimated based on the contractor rates for those services. It's very much in alignment with the rates, again, that we received from the contractor the tender that was adopted recently.
Yeah. Councillor.
Thank you. And then jumping to motion 14, I'll be foreshadowing an alternate on this one as well. I don't have the exact wording, but I expect part of it is going to say, again, writing to the Minister for Planning, John Kerry. And I do have a question to the administration on writing letters to ministers. Is it possible to write open letters where the response may be published publicly? Some of the letters, I think, in my opinion, that we've received and we've written previously, the responses don't always deal with the question. I'm just trying to think of a way where there could be accountability when that occurs.
Director Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. I'm certainly happy to look at that as an option. Certainly if the request is coming from via a council resolution, and if that resolution provides some pretty clear direction on what would be included in that letter, then that's something that we can look at. Rather than commit to it to now, I'd prefer to take that on notice and just give some further consideration for it and provide some advice to elected members in the briefing pack.
That's fine. I'm happy to discuss that rather than trying to work something out exactly. But then jumping forward to motion 15, I'll be seeking an alternate just to give a copy of the minutes of the AGM and the audio to the state and federal members. So I'll provide some wording for that. For motion 16, I also need to declare an interest that may affect impartiality for this one, that I'm the Secretary of Yellowgonga Regional of the Friends of Yellowgonga Regional Park, which is covered by the City of Joondalup's volunteer insurance policy. But I do have a question on this one here. It says here on the officer's comment that there is insurance cover for all the City of Joondalup volunteers, but there are not any age restrictions. But it does say that benefits are limited then dependent on age. So for a volunteer that is over 80, what benefits are open to them, or are they covered, but they can't actually claim anything if something happens to them?
Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And responding through you, there's not so much a limit on who can claim, but more what the likely payment to a person who's injured would be. So typically payments are worked out or calculated based on the impact it would have on the person's quality of life. As people age, the amount that would be offered to them would reduce. So there used to be over 80, it was very difficult to get any form of personal injury insurance. Insurance companies now do offer it as we have a changing demographic in our community, but the payments that would be offered to someone over the age of 85 in particular would be reduced quite dramatically.
Councillor.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions which I'll take on notice on, which I'll probably send through rather than dealing with tonight. But could I be provided with the latest volunteer insurance statement and the insurance certificates that are provided to the Friends groups? Just so I've had a couple of queries from the Friends groups about the terminology in those statements and whether those do actually include cover for Friends groups, because it doesn't seem to be listed in the volunteer groups that are listed specifically, and then there's a further category that says if there is a further determination by LGAS. So,
Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, happy to provide the information in the packs.
Councillor.
Thank you. I will jump forward again to the council dinner motion on motion 21.
I might, if you don't mind,
oh, that's all right.
just jump in. Obviously, my request earlier I'd probably seek something at 20 as well, because the two would go hand in hand. Thank you. Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. For motion 20, I will be seeking just ask a question. What impact do we think that there would be if we asked for the consent of guests to dinners, consent whether their details could be published?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if the council was of the mind to request that information, that would probably be up to elected members who invited those guests to be able to alert those invitees that if they were invited and attended, that their names and their relationship with the city would be disclosed in a public register. And on the evening of the dinner, it's likely that we would probably ask them to provide some sort of consent.
Councillor.
Thank you. And then a question, I don't know if the Mayor may be able to answer this. The practice for the WA Parliament, if somebody is invited to a lunch or a dinner, are those details
It's entirely
published?
Confidential. Nothing of that is published. There are very good reasons for that.
Yeah.
It's a different situation entirely.
I'll be contemplating an alternate for one about publishing guest list, but I'm uncertain about whether that's the best thing to do. So I'm still contemplating that, but I just thought I'd raise that. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Further questions? Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thanks. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just bearing in mind a statement made earlier tonight on motion 14, could I just ask a simple question, please? What level of involvement did the City of Joondalup have in selecting the location of the telecommunications tower at Ocean Reef Marina? And so selection of the location and approval of location. Thank you.
Director Lee.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. To answer the second part of the question first, the telecommunication monopole at the Ocean Reef Marina was not approved by the City of Joondalup. That was approved by the West Australian Planning Commission. It sits within the Ocean Reef Marina improvement scheme, and that the administration of that scheme sits with the state government. When it came to site identification, the city's role is very limited. Fundamentally, telecommunication monopoles are decided by the telecommunication provider. They look at a number of things in terms of essentially where they're able to service their catchment as best possible.
Thank you. And one further question, if I may, through the Mayor, just again relating to the statements made earlier tonight. Could you just clarify, please, why did the City of Joondalup not undertake any community consultation prior to the construction of that communications tower? Thank you.
Director.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. In situations such as these, where the city's not the decision maker, we're guided by our planning consultation, local planning policy, that guides us to, when we aren't the decision maker, rather than undertake the consultation ourselves, we recommend to the decision maker, if it is a type of application that we would typically consult on, we recommend that they undertake consultation prior to any decision being made. That is the case for the telecommunication monopole in Ocean Reef Marina. Prior to making a decision, we encouraged, or requested rather, that the WAPC undertake consultation. But as was pointed out tonight, and as we've discussed previously, that was not done.
Thank you. Councillor Raftis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On motion 3, a couple of questions, if I may, please. Just clarifying in terms of who's the ultimate responsible person for ensuring EBAs are put in place for the city, and is the intention that they are all put in place before their nominal start dates?
Mr CEO is the answer to the first question. Mr CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Raftis. Through you, presiding member. The intention is to negotiate an outcome to all enterprise bargaining agreements within the relevant timeframes, noting that the way in which enterprise agreements works is that they continue past the nominal end date of each agreement. So, for example, with the current enterprise agreement for the inside workforce, its provisions continue to apply even though the nominal end date of the agreement has passed. And in terms of the approach taken, the focus is always on achieving a result which is financially sustainable while taking due account of the cost of the labour market, including the capacity of the city to pay.
Councillor Raftis.
Thank you for the question. On that item, do we have, I suppose, the justifications or explanation as to why the city didn't have this EBA done ahead of the 2022 start date? And perhaps whether that would have avoided involving a new change to the unions being involved.
Councillor, we've given a number of briefings on this, and also I think the CEO's offered a number of opportunities to discuss it in other formats. I think given it's a live negotiation and may go up for further decisions to arbitration, for example, I'm a bit uncomfortable about allowing this line of questioning. I'm happy to shift those questions into confidential space if you wish, and I suggest any further questions on this issue that you ask them at the confidential end of tonight's meeting.
Well, I do wish to ask further questions. perhaps on this next one, whether it's confidential, but in response to the previous answer from the CEO regarding the EBA continuing in place, what happens in terms of pay increases?
As I said, Councillor, I think we'll take EBA questions at the confidential point of tonight's meeting. Further questions on the broader item? Further questions? Go then to item 12.9, questions on this item.
Sorry, Mayor, I had a question.
Busy.
My line on.
Councillor Busy, please.
Sorry, thank you. Just in regards to AGM motion 1, could the city explain to me what discussions they've had with the DBCA about what we and they can do to decrease the fox numbers at Yellowgonga and around other areas?
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the motion which is presented here is a prompt for all three parties to have a look at increases to funding to deal with foxes. It's obvious from the report itself that the cities of Joondalup and DBCA have already had discussions because they've increased the rounds of fox control over the past, from 2023 to 2024, they have increased their funding and the numbers. So if this resolution is adopted by the council, that gives the authority to the City of Joondalup officers to commence those discussions with the DBCA and the City of Wanneroo with regard to possible increases in funding for fox control.
And can I just flag an amendment now to 1.2 to add that not only will that the city notes that they will also provide a report back to council with what they find.
Director Parry.
Through you, Mr Mayor, an alternative recommendation can be drafted.
I think, and it's important to note, I think Councillor Kingston asked for an amendment to this item and Councillor Pizzi's asked for an amendment to this item. If I can stay in that space and not have multiple alternates, it makes it much easier from a governance perspective to manage this item. So I just flag it's an amendment which was requested. I don't think it changes the intent, nor do I think to Councillor Kingston's further point. Further questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on then to 12.9, questions on this item. 12.10, questions on this item. Councillor Raftis.
Sorry, I had it for 12.9. If I could. A couple of quick ones, if I may. Page 210, Slaven Architects regarding Joondalup Public Library.
The question, Director Humphrey? I didn't catch a question there.
Well, the question is, it just says regarding Joondalup Public Library, can we have some more explanation as to what it's actually for, please?
Director Humphrey.
Through Mr Mayor, happy to take that question on notice and provide the information in the pack.
Councillor Raftis.
Thank you. And superior nominees on page 212. Supply and install seats for $31,000 odd. There's an additional one above that for Neil Hawkins Park for some $9,000 odd. So if we could have both of those, please.
Director Humphrey.
Through Mr Mayor, that particular contractor, Miracle Recreation Equipment, provides a lot of equipment for our parks and reserves. I'll have to take the question on notice and provide the details of exactly what was purchased there.
Councillor.
Thank you. And page 219, Total Eden, there's a number of payments for $10,931.74. So 3 lots of that for New Burns Beach Estate. Just seeking clarity whether that's, well, what that work is for and whether that's covered under the SAR arrangement for Burns Beach. Thank you.
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, my initial response is they do like part payments for some form of contracted service. I'm happy to take the question on notice and provide the details of what was purchased and whether or not it's covered by the SAR.
Councillor.
Thank you. And last one, if I could, page 220, trend nominees, the Coastal Explorer bus. Just wonder if we could get a total commitment there for the city for that program. Thank you.
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, happy to take one on notice and provide the details.
Thank you. 12.10, questions on this item. 12.11, questions on this item. 13, I'm just going to roll into reports of committees and then I'll go to the confidential items at the back. 13.1.1, local planning strategy review, questions on this item. Councillor Chester.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to request a small change to the report. Should I do it now or wait for the council meeting, Mr Mayor?
To the report or to the recommendation?
No, to the report itself. It's only a minor change, but an important one.
Yes.
All right, okay. When I look at page 288 of the report, in terms of the assessment areas that the staff mention, they mention Warwick extensively and Greenwood, but when I look at page 291, in the area segment, Area 1, it does not mention the Kingsley and Greenwood Warwick Residents Association as being consulted. I'm just wondering why that was left out. I've had a fervent request from committee members of that organisation. They do really want to be consulted. So I'm really asking for Area 1 for Kagwa to be included in the associations, which it is absent from at the moment.
Director Lee.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. On page 291, there is reference to the Kingsley and Greenwood Warwick Association being identified in Area 2. I do note, however, that on page 288, the map where there is a bit of an overlap between Area 1 and Area 2, I suppose Greenwood and Warwick look to be captured in Area 1 and Kingsley seems to be captured in Area 2 for the most part. I'd expect that's why there's the discrepancy as to why the Residents Association, which straddles both areas, has been identified in one. What I'm happy to do is follow up with our consultants to see if there would be more benefit in bringing Kingsley and Greenwood Warwick Residents Association into Area 1 rather than Area 2. It may be just to balance numbers across the two areas, but happy to follow that up and provide some information for the active members.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Director.
Further questions on this item? 13.1.2, for art, local planning policy, questions on this item? 13.1.3, revocation of Currumbine structure plan and Kinross neighbourhood centre structure plan, questions on this item? 13.1.4, amendment to the private community purposes zone local planning policy, questions on this item? 13.1.5, revocation of Shepherd Way structure plan, questions on this item? 13.1.6, short-term rental accommodation amendment to LPS 3 and amendment to short-term accommodation LPP. Any questions on this item? (13.1.7), elections caretaker council policy review, questions on this item? 13.1.8, questions on this item? Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. I will be making a slight amendment to the adopted to the policy that differs from the committee's recommendation. The administration has advised to remove the wording excluding GST after taking some questions on notice, but I'll circulate that well in advance.
Is it just the words excluding GST? Is that the substance of what you're...
Yeah, so that is the only change that the administration's recommended, just those 2 words.
I'm just, because obviously being a policy committee decision, the standard practice is we put the committee's position first and then an alternate's foreshadowed. So I'm just flagging that.
Yeah, no, that's probably, yeah, you're correct. It's probably best if I move the committee's recommendation and then I'll seek somebody else to move the amendment the administration has suggested.
Thank you.
Simple.
Yep.
Thank you.
Further questions on this item? 13.2.1, compliance audit return. Questions on this item? And 13.2.2, public sector commission integrity education thematic review. Questions on this item? That being the case, we have confidential items being 13.1.9 and 12.4. So I propose that we close the meeting unless someone's hiding behind the lectern. That seems pretty straightforward. Item 14, reports of the Chief Executive Officer. Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. There may be an additional report under item 14, reports the Chief Executive Officer, which would seek Council's agreement regarding a settle amount for the beach enclosure and delegation to officers to enable attendance at the court-assisted mediation, which is scheduled for the 30th of April this year.
Thank you. Urgent business will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting. Motions of which previous notice has been given. Councillor Fishwick has submitted a notice of motion, which I'm assuming you have copies of, and that will form part of the agenda. Are other elected members wishing to flag their intent to raise a notice of motion for the next council meeting? Councillor Hutton.
Yeah, thank you. Subject to a potential report coming, I do have an intention to move a motion to do with waiving the $100 fee for a third permit if e-permit option is selected by residents.
Thank you. No further notices of motion. That concludes tonight's briefing session, and I declare the meeting closed at 8:45 p.m. Thank you all.